The town of Dustfield lay sprawled under a harsh midday sun, a scattering of weathered wooden buildings, sagging porches, and dusty streets that had seen more storms than hope. The wind carried a dry scent of sagebrush and scorched earth, twisting through alleys and empty saloons like a restless spirit. Most of the townsfolk kept their heads down, wary of strangers and wary of trouble, because in this corner of the West, trouble didn't announce itself. It arrived suddenly, without warning, and often left bodies in its wake. Cole read McGraw rode slowly into town, the dust of the plains clinging to his long duster, his hat low, shadowing a scarred face hardened by years he didn't like to remember. Once notorious across half a dozen territories, he had come to Dustfield seeking anonymity, a place to escape the past that clung to him like a shadow. But even in this quiet town, he could feel it, tension, unease, a ripple of fear running through the eyes of the people who watched him pass. They knew his reputation, even if they had never seen him before. The first sign that trouble had arrived came in the form of a rider galloping across the ridge. Dust kicked up in frantic waves as he approached, breathless and wide-eyed. "It's Briggs," the man shouted, voice cracking. "He's bringing men. He wants the ranches." Cole's hand instinctively hovered near his revolver. He dismounted, boots sinking slightly into the dry earth, and scanned the horizon. Briggs, a name whispered with fear in every frontier town. A land baron who collected property with guns, intimidation, and lawmen who turned blind eyes. And now he had set his sights on Dustfield. In the square, a young woman, no older than 20, confronted a pair of Briggs's scouts. Her hair was tied back, dusty strands falling across her determined face. Sarah Langston. She was small in stature, but carried herself with a fire that seemed to challenge the wide-open sky itself. Her family owned one of the last independent ranches in the region, and she had seen enough brutality to harden her resolve. "Move along, girl," one scout sneered, raising his rifle. Sarah's hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "You won't take this land. Not today, not ever." Cole watched from the shadows of the saloon's porch, assessing. Sarah's courage impressed him, even as danger closed in. He had learned long ago that bravery alone didn't guarantee survival, and yet it mattered. It mattered because it gave people a reason to fight, and reasons mattered in a land ruled by bullets and fear. The scouts laughed and moved closer. Sarah's stance faltered for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat, Cole stepped forward, his spurred boots hitting the boardwalk with a sharp rhythm. "Step back," he said, voice calm, carrying authority beyond any law. The men turned, startled by his sudden appearance. "Who?" one began. Cole leveled his revolver. A single gesture, precise, and the two scouts froze. In the West, silence was often louder than gunfire, and in that silence the message was clear: don't make him angry. Sarah's eyes widened. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows the cost of standing still," Cole replied. "You need to move. Now." With Cole at her side, Sarah followed, her pulse racing but hope flickering. The pair moved quickly through narrow alleys and between weathered buildings, unseen by the gang that had begun to encircle the town. The sun dropped lower, stretching shadows across the streets. Every step was measured, every sound analyzed. The West was merciless, and missteps were costly. Cole's mind calculated every possibility. He had come to Dustfield to hide, not to fight, but some things demanded action. Briggs's men were not here for negotiation. They would burn, steal, and kill if left unchecked. And as he glanced at Sarah, he knew she was counting on him to survive. By late afternoon, they reached the outskirts, where the town gave way to hills, dry brush, and jagged rocks. Cole mounted his horse with fluid ease, offering a hand to Sarah. She hesitated, fear and trust warring in her chest, then climbed behind him. The horse moved steadily, hooves kicking up dust that shimmered in the golden light. Behind them, the town shrank into a hazy silhouette. The journey into the hills was quiet, but the silence was tense. Cole signaled subtly, a tilt of his head, a pause, a careful placement of the hand. Sarah began to follow instinctively, learning the unspoken language of survival in a night had fallen over the rugged hills surrounding Dustfield, turning the world into a tapestry of shadows and silvered moonlight. Cole read McGraw led the way, moving silently through the rough terrain, his boots finding purchase on jagged rocks and loose gravel with practiced precision. Sarah Langston followed closely behind, heart pounding, clutching a small satchel with provisions for the journey. Every rustle of brush, every distant howl of a coyote reminded her that the frontier was alive and often deadly. They were not just traveling, they were running a gauntlet. Scouts from Briggs's gang had been sighted near the lower valleys, moving in patrols to intimidate and corral the townsfolk. Cole had taught Sarah the importance of silence, of reading the terrain, of using every shadow to their advantage. She had learned quickly, following hand gestures and subtle signals, learning to anticipate his movements, to become part of the rhythm that dictated survival in the unforgiving West. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and pine, and occasionally the metallic tang of distant blood. Cole's eyes, sharp and constantly scanning, caught every glint of light, every unnatural movement. "Stay close," he whispered, "and trust your instincts. They'll try to separate us if they can." Hours passed as they navigated narrow cliffside paths and dry riverbeds. Sarah stumbled once, her foot catching on a jagged stone, but Cole's steadying hand prevented her from tumbling into the shadows below. That brief contact sent a jolt through her, fear mixed with a budding sense of trust. The gunslinger was still a mystery, his past wrapped in silence and scars. Yet he had chosen to guide her, protect her, and face danger alongside her. As they rounded a ridge, the distant glow of a campfire caught Cole's attention. Scouts, he deduced, likely taking a break before resuming their patrols. He signaled Sarah to crouch behind a boulder. "We'll move past them quietly," he said, voice low, "or make them think we aren't here." Sarah's breath caught as one of the scouts shifted, glancing toward them. Her heart hammered, but she trusted Cole's instinct. Slowly, deliberately, he led her in a wide arc, keeping to the shadows, until they were safely past the camp. In that moment, she realized the value of experience, the kind that came only from surviving battles she could never imagine. Cole's past, hinted at through fleeting expressions and grim jawlines, began to surface in fragments. A scar across his left hand, a pale line along his temple, reminders of duels, betrayals, and deaths he could not forget. "Why help me?" Sarah asked quietly during a brief pause, the moonlight illuminating her determined yet weary face. Cole's gaze swept the horizon, considering the question. "Because sometimes the right thing isn't about the law," he said finally. "It's about the people who can't defend themselves." They pressed on, climbing higher into the hills, where jagged rocks and sparse trees created natural cover. Every step was a test. Loose rocks, steep inclines, and a constant threat of being spotted by Briggs's men. Sarah's muscles burned, and the satchel she carried felt heavier with each mile. But her fear was tempered by purpose, by the trust she had begun to place in Cole. Around midnight, they reached a narrow canyon, its walls rising like sentinels against the starlit sky. The river below whispered in the darkness, a faint glimmer catching the moonlight. Cole motioned for Sarah to stay low as he scouted ahead. "They've set traps," he murmured. "Rocks, trip lines, anyone unfamiliar could trigger them. Stay alert." Time seemed to stretch as they moved through the canyon, each shadow a potential threat. Cole demonstrated every step with careful precision. How to move silently, how to read the wind, how to anticipate danger before it arrived. Sarah mimicked him, each movement a lesson in survival. In those hours, she began to understand that courage alone was not enough. Awareness, calculation, and trust in one another were essential. At the far end of the canyon, a faint campfire glow indicated a temporary refuge, an old ranger's outpost abandoned years ago, now a safe haven for the night. Cole led them there, checking for signs of enemy scouts, traps, or animals. Sarah sank to the ground, exhausted but relieved. For the first time, she felt a fragile sense of hope. They were not safe, but they were alive, and alive meant there was a chance to fight, to protect the town, and perhaps to shape their own destinies. Cole kept watch as Sarah rested, his mind calculating the next steps. Briggs would not wait. He would strike at dawn if they did not act. And yet, in the stillness of the canyon night, a subtle bond had formed between them, one forged not through words, but through shared danger, silent communication, and the unspoken understanding that survival required both skill and trust. The first real test of that trust would come with the morning sun. Briggs's mercenaries would be waiting, ready to crush anyone who opposed them. And Cole knew that only through courage, strategy, and the unlikely alliance he had forged with Sarah could they hope to survive the coming storm. As the stars wheeled overhead, reflecting in the river below, both understood a simple truth. The West demanded more than bravery. It demanded loyalty, cunning, and the willingness to stand and fight, even when the odds were stacked impossibly against you. The first light of dawn crept over the jagged hills, spilling pale gold across Dustfield's outskirts. The town still slept in uneasy silence, unaware that the frontier was about to erupt in violence. Cole read McGraw and Sarah crouched behind a ridge overlooking the valley where Briggs's mercenaries had gathered. The air was thick with tension, the smell of sagebrush and dust mingling with the faint tang of gun oil. Every muscle in Cole's body was coiled like a spring. Years of experience had honed him to a state of constant awareness. "They're moving in smaller groups," Cole whispered, nodding toward the valley below. "We'll need to strike fast. We can't let them spread panic across the town." Sarah swallowed hard, tightening her grip on the rifle Cole had lent her. Her hands trembled slightly, but her resolve had strengthened since the night in the canyon. She had learned to move silently, to anticipate danger, and to trust Cole in ways she hadn't imagined possible. Cole signaled with subtle hand gestures, and they moved down the ridge, staying low among rocks and scrub. The first pair of scouts passed unaware, rifles slung loosely. With precise timing, Cole fired, a muffled shot echoing against the canyon walls. The first scout went down quietly, his body disappearing into the dust. Sarah's heart thumped violently, but she followed Cole's instructions, holding her breath, waiting, moving with purpose. The next group approached, slightly more alert. Cole rolled from cover to cover, taking advantage of rocks and shadow. Sarah mirrored his movements, her pulse racing with each step. The sound of distant river rapids mixed with the hiss of ricocheted bullets. The morning sun glinted off the mercenaries' rifles, blinding and beautiful in its own lethal way. A sudden shout. One scout had noticed movement. Cole reacted instantly, spinning his revolver with deadly accuracy. 2 shots rang out, and the scout fell. Chaos erupted among the remaining men as Cole and Sarah advanced, forcing them toward the center of the valley where traps and terrain favored the defenders. Briggs himself appeared, riding a black stallion, flanked by his most loyal enforcers. His face was twisted in rage, a cruel grin under the brim of his hat. "Red McGraw," he shouted, voice booming. "You think a town and a girl can stop me?" Cole's eyes narrowed. He had faced men like Briggs before, cruel, relentless, and cunning. But he had also learned the art of strategy, of using the land, the shadows, and his opponent's arrogance against them. "Try me," he muttered, low enough for Sarah to hear. Gunfire exploded across the valley. Dust, sparks, and screams filled the air. Cole moved fluidly, a whirlwind of motion, disarming one thug with a sweep, firing another with perfect precision, and dodging the spray of bullets with instinct born of experience. Sarah followed, ducking behind rocks, taking careful shots, and flinching with every near miss. She realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite it. Briggs's men regrouped, forming a wall of rifles, trying to corner them. Cole gestured toward a narrow ravine leading toward the town's outskirts. "We funnel them," he shouted. "Drive them where we can control them." With careful coordination, Cole and Sarah forced the mercenaries toward the trap-laden ravine. Rocks shifted, tripwires snapped, and a few of Briggs's men stumbled into concealed pitfalls. The chaos worked in their favor, and the balance of power shifted. Briggs, furious, charged at Cole directly. The two men clashed in a tense duel, revolvers spinning, boots sliding on loose dirt. The exchange was precise, deadly, and cinematic, bullets cutting the air, dust kicking up, sweat and determination etched on every face. Sarah stayed low but prepared, ready to assist if necessary, heart pounding. Finally, Cole feinted, creating an opening. A single shot struck Briggs's rifle out of his hands, forcing him to retreat toward the river below. The remaining mercenaries, seeing their leader falter, scattered into the hills. The valley fell silent again, except for the rush of the river and the ragged breaths of the survivors. Cole lowered his revolvers, surveying the aftermath. Dust hung in the morning air like a shroud. Sarah approached cautiously, the adrenaline leaving her body in trembling waves. She met Cole's gaze, a mixture of awe and gratitude. "We did it," she whispered, barely believing it. Cole's voice was calm, though every instinct was alert. "This is only the beginning," he said. "Briggs may return. Others will try. But we've proven we can fight and survive together." For the first time, Sarah felt the weight of her own transformation. She had entered the canyon fearful and uncertain. Now, she stood as a participant in a battle that would define the town's survival. And in that, she recognized a bond with Cole, forged in the fire of danger, strengthened by trust, and tempered by courage. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the valley, painting the landscape gold. Cole and Sarah made their way toward the town, careful and deliberate. Every step carried lessons learned. Every glance reminded them that the frontier demanded vigilance. They had survived the ambush, but the West was vast and merciless, and the next test could come at any moment. Cole glanced at Sarah, his expression unreadable. "The town is alive," he said quietly, "but so are they. Stay ready." And with that, they disappeared into the hills, survivors, strategists, and warriors of the Wild West. A gunslinger and a young woman whose courage had changed everything, preparing for the final confrontation that would decide their fates and the fate of Dustfield forever. The sun was sinking low when Cole read McGraw and Sarah Langston rode back into Dustfield. The town lay quiet beneath the orange glow of twilight, wind whispering through the empty streets. Smoke still curled faintly from chimneys, mingling with the smell of gunpowder that hung heavy in the air. Dustfield had survived, but only barely. Cole dismounted, boots hitting the ground with a thud that seemed to echo the fading heartbeat of battle. The townsfolk peeked out from their doors and windows, faces etched with fear, hope, and awe. The gunslinger had saved them, but they also knew what it meant. Trouble never ended with one fight. It just changed faces. Sarah looked around, scanning the destruction. "We can rebuild," she said softly, voice trembling but determined. "We always do." Cole nodded, his gaze drawn toward the horizon where the sun bled into streaks of crimson and gold. He had seen too many towns rise and fall, too many good people buried under the dust of greed and war. "You rebuild," he said. "You've earned that right." Sarah turned sharply. "What do you mean you? You're part of this, Cole. You fought for us." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the hills where the shadows were lengthening. "Briggs isn't dead," he said finally. "Not yet." Her breath caught. "But we—" He ran. Cole interrupted. "Wounded, maybe, but men like him don't disappear easy." Even as he spoke, the faint echo of distant hooves reached their ears. A single rider emerged on the ridge, a figure in black, hat low, moving with the slow, deliberate rhythm of vengeance. Briggs had returned, battered but alive, rage burning in his eyes like wildfire. The town froze. Every man, woman, and child felt the tension snap like a drawn wire. Cole stepped into the open street, his silhouette framed by the dying sun. Sarah's voice broke. "You can't face him alone." Cole gave her a faint, weary smile. "It's not about me anymore. It's about ending this for good." The street fell silent except for the wind. Briggs dismounted, stumbling slightly from his injuries, yet his hand found a revolver at his hip. "You could have walked away, McGraw," he spat. "Could have lived your last days in peace." Cole's hand hovered near his own gun, steady as stone. Peace isn't something men like us get to keep. For a long, breathless moment, time stopped. The air shimmered with heat and tension. Dust swirled between them, golden in the dying light. Two men, one seeking redemption, the other consumed by revenge, stood on the edge of legend. Then came the draw. Two flashes. Two sounds that split the evening air. Briggs staggered first, disbelief in his eyes as crimson bloomed across his chest. He dropped his weapon, stumbled backward, and fell into the dirt, lifeless. Cole stood motionless for a moment, then holstered his revolver with slow precision. The fight was over. Sarah ran to him, breath ragged. "You did it," she said, voice breaking. "It's over now." But as the cheers of the townsfolk began to rise, Cole swayed slightly. A dark stain spread across his coat. Briggs's bullet had found its mark, too. He pressed a hand to the wound, eyes already dimming. "Guess peace found me after all," he said, his voice a rough whisper. "No," Sarah cried, catching him as his knees buckled. "No, you're not dying like this." Cole's gaze softened as he looked at her. This brave, fierce girl who had trusted him when no one else would. "You've got to keep fighting, Sarah. For them. For yourself." She shook her head, tears streaking through the dust on her cheeks. "You can't leave us." Cole's lips curved in a faint smile. "You'll be fine. You've got the heart of the West, and that's something no man can take from you." He reached into his coat and handed her his revolver, the weapon that had both damned and redeemed him. "Keep it," he murmured. "Not for killing, for remembering." The last light of day faded as Cole's breathing slowed. The gunslinger who had once been feared across the frontier now lay still, his face peaceful, his burdens finally lifted. The town stood silent, the moments stretching into eternity. Sarah stayed beside him long after the others carried Briggs's body away. When the stars came out, she buried Cole on the ridge overlooking Dustfield, beneath the same sky he had once ridden under. A simple wooden cross marked his grave, carved with 3 words she could barely see through her tears. He kept his word. Days later, Dustfield began to rebuild. The townsfolk worked together, inspired by the courage of a man who had come as a stranger and left as a savior. Sarah became their leader, young, determined, carrying the memory of the gunslinger who had believed in her strength. At dusk, she often climbed the ridge, looking out over the plains where the wind whispered through the grass. Sometimes she swore she could hear the faint jingle of spurs, the soft snort of a horse, the ghostly echo of gunfire fading into the horizon. Cole McGraw had become a legend, a story told around campfires, of a man who found redemption not through glory or gold, but through sacrifice and courage. And as the sun sank behind the mountains, painting the sky in the same fiery colors as that final day, Sarah whispered into the wind, "Ride easy, Cole. The West remembers you."